Andre Collins had everything he wanted: comfort, admiration, control. At least, that's what he told himself. On April 12, 2021, he offered his wife a ride, just the two of them, a quiet drive after church. Moments later, sirens filled the night. Only one of them made it back alive. What really happened on that road? Eleanor Matthews' mornings had a rhythm that rarely changed. The kettle's soft whistle, the rustle of the Savannah Morning News folded neatly beside her Bible, and the sound of her neighbor's dog barking through the fence. Life for her was built on habits, habits that steadied her after loss. For 15 years, she led Jefferson High School with a mix of compassion and authority that earned her quiet respect across Chatham County. To students, she was Ms. Matthews, the woman who remembered birthdays and scolded with kindness. To her colleagues, she was the glue that kept the school from coming apart when budgets cut deep and tempers ran short. Even after retirement, people would stop her in grocery store aisles just to thank her for keeping them out of trouble. She'd smile and say, "You did that yourself. I just reminded you who you could be." Her husband, Samuel, had been her balance, the calm to her order, the music to her stillness. He played organ at church every Sunday, and their marriage of 32 years was the kind that others quietly admired. They didn't need grand gestures. Their love was measured in everyday faithfulness, the way he always warmed her car before work, the way she ironed his shirts even after chemo began to take his strength. When he passed in 2013, the house grew silent in ways that sound can't fill. For months she kept his music books on the piano, untouched. The metronome on the shelf still ticked, though no one had wound it since his funeral. Grief changed her, but not all at once. It started with forgetfulness, missed appointments, unanswered calls. Then came the restless energy of a woman who'd spent her life serving others and didn't know what to do with her own loneliness. She joined community boards, chaired fundraisers, even appeared on WSAV's Savannah Today to discuss literacy programs. Her daughter Maya would tease her, "Mom, you're busier retired than when you worked." Eleanor would laugh, but never quite deny it, because busyness for her was armor. The moment she slowed down, the quiet reminded her of what was missing. By 2018, she had rebuilt a kind of peace. Sunday dinners were sacred. She'd cook too much, talk too much, and always send leftovers home with Maya and the boys. She gardened, read mystery novels, and volunteered at church. The world saw a woman who had overcome tragedy with grace. But privately, she still set 2 plates at the table some nights, one for herself and one for the memory of the man she'd loved. Maya once asked her, "Mom, do you ever think about dating again?" Eleanor smiled gently. "I've had my love story," she said. "I just want peace now." And for a while, peace seemed to hold. While Eleanor was keeping order in classrooms and finding purpose in faith, a few hours away in Macon, Georgia, another life was unfolding in a very different rhythm. Andre Collins grew up surrounded by grease, noise, and drive, literally. His father, known around town as Big Joe the Fixer, ran a small auto shop behind their house. By 9, Andre could pull apart an engine faster than most men twice his age, but Big Joe wasn't much of a father. When work was slow, he drank. When work picked up, he disappeared for days. Andre's mother, Denise, worked nights at the county hospital and taught him early how to survive without depending on anyone. After high school, Andre drifted. A year of community college, a few odd jobs, and then the same garage that had once belonged to his father became his inheritance. In 2009, he opened Collins Auto Works with more ambition than experience. He was good with his hands, good with people, and better with charm. Local customers said he could talk the paint off a car. By 30, he had a reputation for skill and a taste for showmanship. Leather jackets, gold watch, bright smiles. His garage walls were lined with photos of cars he'd rebuilt, and the trophies from local auto shows where he posed like a man who'd already made it. But for every trophy, there was a debt. Andre liked living big, even when his business wasn't. He took out small loans to expand, then bigger ones when payments fell behind. He'd tell friends, "You gotta look successful to become successful." Behind closed doors, the math never added up. The bills piled. So did the pressure. Still, He had a gift for appearances. He'd show up at charity car exhibitions, always ready with a joke or compliment. He flirted easily, made friends quickly, and kept enemies guessing. Women noticed him. He noticed their security. Andre was a man who measured success not just by money, but by who was sitting beside him when the lights went down. By 2016, his mother's health declined. Denise was diagnosed with congestive heart failure, forcing Andre to balance medical bills with business debts. The strain began to show. He sold one of his prized classic cars to pay hospital expenses and told a friend, "Sometimes I feel like I'm working just to stay broke." When his mother passed 2 years later, something in him hardened. He stopped talking about building a future and started talking about finding a shortcut to one. People in Macon remembered him fondly but cautiously. One former employee, interviewed later, said, "Andre was charming, but there was always something behind it, like he was performing." When asked what kind of boss he was, she paused. "The kind that smiles when he needs you and vanishes when you need him." In contrast, Eleanor's former colleagues described her in near-reverent tones. Patricia Graham, her assistant principal, told investigators, "Eleanor could calm a storm with her presence. You just trusted her. She had that effect." Trust. It's a word that would echo through every stage of her story, and the word that would cost her everything. Back then, she had no idea how far from that quiet order her life was about to drift. She was focused on family, retirement plans, and faith. She'd recently spoken at a teacher's reunion saying, "Love and discipline are the same thing if you do them right." That line would later haunt people who knew her because it perfectly described the way she lived, believing in structure, believing in good intentions, believing that if you gave people the benefit of the doubt, they'd rise to meet it. But life doesn't always reward faith. Sometimes it weaponizes it. Across counties, Andre's ambitions continued to outpace his earnings. In early 2018, he joined a car club in Savannah, hoping to expand his customer base. He rented a small booth at an auto expo that summer, where he showed off a restored 1969 Mustang. It was there that a reporter from the Savannah Tribune snapped a photo of him. Bright smile, clean overalls, confident posture. The caption read, "Andre Collins, owner of Collins Auto Works, proves Georgia craftsmanship still thrives." He kept that article in his office. For him, image was currency, but as debts mounted, so did his frustration. Creditors called. One of his suppliers repossessed equipment. Andre's charm began to turn defensive. Employees left. Friends noticed him drinking more, growing short-tempered. "He was always talking about his next big break," said one acquaintance later. "He just never had a plan that didn't involve somebody else's money." By the fall of 2018, he'd begun traveling to Savannah more frequently, claiming he was networking to attract wealthier clients. What he was really looking for was stability, someone or something that could anchor him financially and emotionally. Eleanor, meanwhile, had been planning to restore her late husband's Buick. It had been sitting in her garage for years under a tarp. She'd written in her journal, "I want to hear that engine one more time. Maybe it'll help me remember the good years without falling apart." Their stories were about to intersect, but not yet. For now, they remained two lives on separate roads, hers guided by faith and habit, his driven by ambition and restlessness. Their meeting would seem like chance, but it would become the turning point that defined everything that followed. Eleanor's final year before Andre was filled with small victories. She helped her grandson apply for college, joined a local mentoring group, and took a trip to Charleston with her church choir. She was content, not euphoric, not lonely, just quietly grateful. She once told Maya over dinner, "Peace doesn't always mean excitement, honey. Sometimes it just means the absence of chaos. But peace never lasts forever, especially when someone else sees it as opportunity." By December 2018, Andre's finances were stretched thin. His business credit cards maxed out, and the garage insurance lapsed. He needed a new investor, or perhaps a lifeline that didn't look like one. To his friends, he started saying he was ready to settle down, though no one had ever heard him talk about marriage before. When asked what kind of woman he wanted, his answer was quick: someone who appreciates loyalty and knows how to build something that lasts." It sounded sincere. It wasn't. The irony is that both were, in their own ways, praying for a second chance. She for connection, he for survival. When their worlds finally collided, neither would realize how completely it would rewrite their fates. Before we continue this story, make sure you're subscribed and your notifications are on, because what happens next isn't just about love. It's about how easily love can disguise ambition, and how one choice can set an entire tragedy in motion. 2019, Savannah, Georgia. Spring Fair weekend. The city had come alive again after a quiet winter, streets lined with food trucks, the air heavy with the scent of roasted pecans and barbecue smoke. On the south end of town, just off Victory Drive, Collins Auto Works was open late, its neon sign flickering above the bay door. Inside, Andre Collins wiped his hands on a clean rag as a 1967 Buick Riviera rolled into view, cream-colored, vintage, and struggling to breathe after years under a tarp. Behind the wheel sat a woman who didn't quite belong to this part of town. Her posture was graceful, her movements deliberate. Eleanor Matthews stepped out, introduced herself politely, and explained that the car had belonged to her late husband, Samuel. She wanted to restore it, not to sell, but as a memorial. Andre looked at the car, then at her, and smiled the kind of smile that disarms. "Now this right here is history, Ms. E. I'll treat her like she's mine." From that moment, something unspoken began to form, a connection neither of them would name, not yet. To Eleanor, the visit was simple nostalgia, a way to hold on to a piece of her past. But for Andre, it was opportunity wrapped in charm. He saw the details that mattered: her diamond wedding band, her soft-spoken tone, the way she mentioned retirement as though it came with comfort. He called her Ms. E from the start, a title that felt both respectful and familiar. When she hesitated about the cost, he waved his hand and said, "For you, I'll take care of it. We'll make it right, not rich." It made her laugh. It had been years since someone spoke to her with that easy mix of confidence and kindness. Andre noticed that laugh lingered. It gave him an opening he intended to keep. Over the next few weeks, Eleanor stopped by the shop often, sometimes to check progress, sometimes to bring sweet tea for the mechanics. Andre made sure he was always the one to greet her. "You know, Ms. E, cars are like people. You neglect them too long, they forget how to move forward." She smiled at the metaphor, not knowing how literal those words would one day become. He started calling her after hours to update her on the restoration, and soon those calls drifted into longer conversations about life, faith, and second chances. She told him about her years in education, how she missed the students but not the paperwork. He told her about his mother's passing, about how work kept him grounded. He never mentioned the debt. By late spring, what began as business turned into friendship. Andre started dropping by the high school to deliver photos of the Buick's progress, even though he could have easily emailed them. Teachers whispered in the hallways when they saw him waiting in the lobby. Clean-cut, polite, with a charm that filled a room. One teacher later recalled, "He was the kind of man who looked you straight in the eye when he talked, and you believed every word." Eleanor tried to brush off the gossip, but she knew people talked. In a town like Savannah, everyone talked. Still, something about Andre's attention felt good. For the first time in years, someone was looking at her not as a widow, not as a principal, but as a woman. Their conversations grew more personal. One afternoon, after walking her to her car, Andre said quietly, "You remind me of peace, Ms. E. Most people bring chaos, but you bring quiet." It was the kind of line that might sound rehearsed to others, but in that moment, Eleanor believed it. That night she told her daughter, "He's a nice young man, ambitious, respectful." Maya frowned. "Mom, he's young enough to be your son." Eleanor laughed, replying, "Then maybe that's what keeps me young." It was an innocent joke, but it said more than she realized. To Andre's friends, his tone was different. He started talking about Eleanor often, calling her solid and steady. At a local car meet, one of his buddies teased him, "Man, You gone corporate on us." Andre grinned and said, "Nah, just found stability for once." The word hung in the air, stability. For him, it meant more than comfort. It meant safety, structure, and maybe an escape from the chaos he'd built. To Eleanor, his interest felt like grace. To Andre, it felt like timing. The car's restoration became symbolic, a shared project that brought them together. Each time she visited, Andre made sure there was a small improvement waiting, something to impress her. When the fresh coat of paint gleamed under the shop lights, she told him softly, "Samuel would have loved this." Andre nodded, replying, "Then we did it right." He didn't say you did it right. He said we. That subtle shift from professional to personal changed everything. By the time summer arrived, their friendship had become the talk of her social circle, her church. Friends whispered in fellowship hall, "You seen Ms. Matthews lately? She got a glow." Others were less kind, saying she was letting her guard down too easily. Eleanor brushed it aside, insisting, "At my age, you stop worrying about how things look and start enjoying how they feel." But there was something about Andre that even those close to him didn't fully understand. Beneath his calm exterior was a man accustomed to chasing validation. He'd tell people he worked hard for everything, but in truth, he worked hardest at maintaining his image. A neighbor remembered overhearing him one night arguing over the phone about overdue payments. "Man, I just need a little more time," Andre said. "Things are turning around, I promise." No one knew that those things included a new friendship that looked increasingly like something deeper. By early fall, the Buick was complete. Andre personally delivered it to Eleanor's driveway, arriving just as the sun dipped behind the Spanish moss hanging over the street. When the engine roared to life for the first time in years, she closed her eyes, tears forming. "You brought him back," she whispered, referring to her late husband. Andre's reply was gentle, almost rehearsed. "Maybe he just needed you to move forward again." They stood in silence as the engine idled, a sound that carried equal parts closure and beginning. In the weeks that followed, they began to see each other outside the shop. Coffee turned into lunch. Lunch turned into Sunday service. Their connection grew naturally, though not without notice. Former colleagues from Jefferson High saw them together at a local diner. One of them, later interviewed, recalled, "She looked happy, happier than I'd seen her in years. But his eyes were always calculating something." Still, Eleanor dismissed the warnings. When Patricia, her closest friend, asked if she really trusted this younger man, she said, "Trust isn't something you measure by years. It's something you feel." Patricia later told investigators that was the first time she saw a hint of vulnerability in her friend. A woman who'd spent her life making measured choices suddenly speaking with her heart instead of her head. Andre's background remained mostly hidden. He shared charming stories about his mother's cooking, his childhood, his dreams of opening another shop in Savannah. He said things like, "I just want to build something that lasts, you know?" Eleanor admired that ambition. But what she didn't know was that his business in Macon was barely holding together. Tax filings later revealed that he'd taken out multiple short-term loans that same summer, loans he hadn't paid back. He'd also transferred the lease on his garage equipment to another name. Their friendship became a mirror for what they both lacked. Eleanor saw in him the energy she thought she'd lost. Andre saw in her the stability he could never earn alone. As fall turned to winter, their lives began to intertwine in small, almost imperceptible ways. Shared prayers at church, phone calls before bed, mutual mentions at community events. By December, people were referring to them as the Matthews couple, even though they weren't married. The title fit more than either would admit. Savannah's small-town media took notice. Local reporters covering the city's education awards photographed Eleanor at a school ceremony, smiling with Andre beside her. The caption read, "Former Principal Eleanor Matthews celebrates community excellence with local business owner Andre Collins." For the public, they looked respectable. Two accomplished adults finding happiness later in life. For those who looked closer, though, the picture held quiet tension, her serenity beside his intensity. And so, their story began, not with fireworks or grand declarations, but with a handshake, a car, and a loneliness neither had named out loud. Two lives running parallel for decades had finally intersected, not through fate, but through timing. The question, though, is what timing truly means. Was it chance that Eleanor brought her late husband's car to that particular shop? Or was Andre, already desperate for footing, drawn toward her world by something less innocent? You decide. But what's certain is that from that moment on, the course of both their lives was locked in. September 14th, 2019. The late summer air in Georgia was warm and steady, the kind that clung to skin and made the evening glow just a little longer. The wedding was intimate. Family, close friends, a few church members. Eleanor wore a cream lace gown, classic and graceful. Her hair pinned the way Samuel once said made her look like sunlight in motion. Andre stood beside her in a tailored gray suit, his smile wide, polished, practiced. The guests saw what looked like a story of redemption, a woman who'd rediscovered joy and a man who'd found stability. The minister spoke of second chances and enduring love. When they exchanged vows, Andre held her hand tightly and whispered just loud enough for her to hear, "You'll never regret this, Ms. E." The room erupted in applause, and even Maya, seated near the aisle, forced a small smile, though her eyes told another story. The following weeks felt like a promise fulfilled. Andre moved into Eleanor's colonial-style home just off Wilmington Avenue, a quiet, tree-lined street where neighbors waved from porches and children still rode bikes after sunset. She retired early, saying she wanted to enjoy life while there's still breath in it. Friends saw her at peace for the first time in years. Sunday mornings meant church, and Sunday evenings meant family dinner. Andre in the kitchen, wearing her late husband's apron, laughing as he experimented with recipes he'd found online. To Eleanor, it was healing. To Andre, it was positioning. She paid off lingering house repairs, added his name to their joint account for convenience, and proudly told Maya, "It feels good to have someone take care of me for a change." But what she didn't realize was that Andre had no intention of sharing control, only claiming it. Within months, Andre began suggesting little improvements for his business. "All I need is a small loan," he told her one night over dinner. "If I can get new equipment, I can hire more workers, make it self-sustaining." Eleanor hesitated. "You're already doing so much. Maybe wait until the first one's paid off." Andre sighed, lowering his voice. "You don't trust me?" It was the first time she'd seen his temper flicker. Feeling guilty, she relented and offered to help. "If it's what you need to stay afloat," she said, "I'll stand with you." She signed the paperwork at his insistence, becoming co-signer on a loan she never saw the terms of. When the funds hit, Andre's garage did get new tools, but the bills didn't stop coming. By spring, the account balance was noticeably lighter, and Eleanor's financial advisor called to confirm an unusual withdrawal. Andre brushed it off with a laugh. "It's just business, Ms. E. You know I'd never let anything hurt us." At first, harmony lingered. They hosted neighbors, attended cookouts, and appeared inseparable. Andre spoke fondly of his wife to anyone who'd listen. "She's my blessing," he'd say, "my reason to wake up." But behind closed doors, the tone shifted. He began taking her car without asking, intercepting her mail, and questioning her calls. When Maya called one evening to ask why her mother's phone kept going to voicemail, Eleanor admitted, "Andre said he wants us to focus more on each other, less on distractions." Maya's voice hardened. "Mom, that's not focus, that's control." Eleanor changed the subject, unwilling to argue. As Andre's debts grew, so did his dependence. He began convincing Eleanor to liquidate small investments temporarily to cover business emergencies. When she asked to see the invoices, he'd shake his head, saying, "You don't have to worry about that stuff. It's all under control." She wanted to believe him. She needed to. After all, she'd staked her future on this marriage, the idea that love could rewrite the loneliness of widowhood. He used that faith like a key. Neighbors started noticing subtle changes. Eleanor, once active in her church committees, stopped attending midweek meetings. She began skipping brunches with old friends, explaining that Andre likes it when I'm home. Her tone wasn't fearful, it was resigned. Patricia, her closest confidant, recalled visiting one afternoon and finding Eleanor quieter than usual. "You look tired," Patricia said. Eleanor smiled weakly. "Marriage keeps you busy." Patricia later told investigators that wasn't the smile of a happy woman. It was the smile of someone trying not to make trouble. Inside the house, small frictions became patterns. Andre would comment on her spending, her clothes, her friends. "You don't need to impress anyone anymore," he'd say. "You've got me." When she tried to push back, he'd apologize the next morning with breakfast in bed, saying, "You know, I just want to protect you." It worked every time. He knew exactly how to wrap control in tenderness. Financially, things worsened. In June 2020, Andre's business nearly collapsed after a supplier filed a lien for unpaid equipment. Instead of scaling back, he went to Eleanor again. "I need you to co-sign one more loan," he pleaded. "If the shop closes, 3 men lose their jobs. I can't live with that on my conscience." Eleanor hesitated. "Andre, we've already done so much. Maybe it's time to step back." His reply was sharp. "So you don't believe in me anymore?" The words stung. She'd built her life on believing in people. Within a week, she'd signed again. Over time, the pattern became invisible to everyone but Maya. She noticed her mother's wardrobe shifting. Fewer bright colors, simpler jewelry. She noticed Andre answering her calls instead of Eleanor. "Your mom's in the bath," he'd say smoothly. "I'll tell her you called." Sometimes she'd hear laughter in the background, sometimes just silence. When she finally confronted her mother in person, she asked, "Are you okay?" Eleanor looked away, replying softly, "Marriage is work, baby. We're just finding our rhythm." But the rhythm was already offbeat. Andre's confidence outside the home continued to grow. He began introducing himself at social gatherings as a business owner and husband to one of Savannah's finest. The pride in his voice sounded genuine, but so did the calculation underneath. People who met them often described the couple as opposites that balanced each other. Her calm to his drive. But balance can be misleading. Behind that facade, Andre had taken full control of their finances, gradually moving access from shared to personal accounts. Eleanor didn't notice at first. When she finally did, he explained it away as business structure. Still, there were glimpses of the man she once believed him to be. On her 62nd birthday, he surprised her with a dinner at a downtown restaurant. The waiter remembered their interaction vividly. "She looked happy," he said later, but he kept checking his phone. "When I brought the cake, she leaned over and said, 'Andre, I don't need all this. I just need you to be here.' And he said, 'I'm right here, aren't I?' But his eyes never left the screen. By the fall of 2020, cracks in the illusion had deepened. Andre's temper began to show in flashes. Once, when she asked about a late payment notice that arrived in the mail, he slammed the counter and said, 'You don't need to question me like I'm one of your students.' She froze. The next morning, he apologized with flowers, saying, 'I just get frustrated when things don't go my way. You know I'd never hurt you.' She believed him. Everyone said he was good with words, and he was. Maya, however, stopped visiting as often. "I can't sit in that house," she confided to Patricia. "It doesn't feel like my mom's anymore." Patricia encouraged her to keep reaching out, but deep down, both women knew something had shifted. Eleanor's laughter had become cautious, her answers rehearsed. The independence that once defined her had been quietly traded for peace, a peace she didn't realize she was buying on credit. Andre, meanwhile, was quietly unraveling behind the scenes. His garage, once lively, was now half empty. Customers complained about delays. A former employee described him as on edge, like he was waiting for something big to happen. That something would soon become the unraveling of their lives. By late 2020, Eleanor received a notice from her financial institution alerting her to an account overdraft she didn't recognize. She confronted Andre gently, asking, "Did you move some funds without telling me?" He looked her dead in the eye and said, "You think I'd ever steal from you?" It wasn't the words that scared her. It was how calmly he said them. She thought she was building a future. He was refinancing her past. And as 2021 approached, the home that once felt like refuge began to feel smaller, quieter, watched. Phone calls went unanswered, friendships faded, and her world, once full of voices, narrowed to one. His. Before we move to what happened next, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. And if you're still here for Eleanor's story, comment, "I'm still here." Let's see who's watching closely, because what's coming next will make you question just how well anyone can really know the person they married. ChatGPT said, Andre's charm, once a steady force that held them together, began to fade as winter turned to spring in 2021. The easy smiles and casual affection Eleanor once took for granted now seemed forced, like a performance Andre no longer cared to give. His nights out became more frequent, his phone always face down when he was home. Eleanor, who had always trusted him without question, found herself second-guessing every conversation, every glance. The subtle change didn't escape her. She noticed it first when she came home from choir practice one evening to find Andre's phone buzzing on the kitchen counter. His tone was light and playful, a voice she didn't recognize. "Hey, baby," the woman laughed through the voicemail. "Are we still on for this weekend?" The words hung in the air long after the message ended. Eleanor felt her stomach drop. It wasn't just the phone call, it was everything. He'd been distant for weeks now, slipping away little by little. When she confronted him, the words he spoke cut deeper than she imagined they could. "You wouldn't understand the kind of attention I need," he said, dismissing her hurt with a smirk. "You're too old for that." His cruel dismissal stung more than anything he had ever said to her, but she didn't argue. She couldn't. The tears didn't come either. She just stood there, holding on to the silence between them. She wanted to be angry, to scream at him, but the betrayal felt so much deeper than she could have anticipated. Instead, she smiled politely at her church group the next Sunday, keeping up appearances like she always had. "I'm fine," she told Patricia as they set up chairs before the service. But once they were alone, the mask dropped. "I feel like a tenant in my own life, Pat," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Patricia, always the realist, gave her a long, hard look. She knew this wasn't the woman she'd once worked beside, strong, composed, self-assured. Eleanor's voice cracked as she continued. "I don't know what's happening to us, but it's like I'm invisible to him now. I don't even recognize the man I married." In the weeks that followed, Eleanor did what she had done for most of her life. She kept moving forward. She tended to her community work, called her daughter Maya every other day, and even made sure Andre's favorite dishes were on the table when he came home. But inside, something was unraveling. She found herself constantly replaying his words in her head. "You're too old for that." The stinging reminder of his growing indifference was enough to shake her from her blind trust. She realized that for the first time in their marriage, she was no longer looking forward to seeing him, but bracing herself for whatever would come next. On a cold day in March 2021, Eleanor took a step that would change everything. She made an appointment with her attorney, Harold Nixon. The idea had been slowly taking root in her mind for weeks, but the voicemail, the dismissiveness, Andre's sudden coldness had pushed her to act. She knew now that the man she thought she married wasn't the man who stood beside her now. She couldn't rely on him anymore. His charm, his sweet words, his gestures, they had all been a performance, and the show was over. Her meeting with Harold was a quiet one, almost unremarkable, until the moment Eleanor spoke her truth. She'd already started drafting changes to her will, but this time she made it official. "I want my daughter to be my beneficiary," she told Harold, her hands trembling slightly as she signed the papers. "I don't want Andre to have control over anything of mine anymore." She didn't look at him as she spoke. She didn't need to. The words felt heavy and final, like she was lifting a burden she had carried for too long. It wasn't just the money. It was her sense of safety, her peace of mind, everything that she had worked so hard to build. She revoked Andre's power of attorney, effectively cutting the last string that bound her to him financially. As the documents were signed and filed, Eleanor knew that once the ink dried, there would be no going back. She wasn't just rewriting her will, she was rewriting her life. This wasn't an impulsive decision. It was a necessity. She needed to take control of what was hers before Andre found a way to take it all. If you're enjoying this content, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share this video with your loved ones. What happened to Eleanor could happen to anyone, and it's important that we all protect ourselves and the people we care about. Let's keep learning from these stories so we can keep our own lives safe from the kinds of betrayals that can tear us apart. It was a cool, quiet morning in Savannah on March 27, 2021, when the letter arrived. At first, Eleanor didn't notice it. Her mailbox was a mix of bills and magazines, nothing out of the ordinary. But when Andre came in from the garage, holding the envelope with an unreadable look in his eyes, it became clear that something had shifted. He didn't speak immediately. Instead, he stared at the letter, his grip tightening, as if holding the paper a little too long would somehow make the words disappear. When Eleanor glanced over, she could see the logo of the probate office, the same one that had sent her previous letters about her will updates. She hadn't been expecting any correspondence from them so soon, but there it was, proof that the changes she'd made to her will, removing Andre as the beneficiary, had gone through. He knew before she did. That night, something changed in the house. Neighbors later recalled hearing the distant thrum of Andre's car engine around 2 a.m., followed by loud music that echoed through the quiet street. The sounds of rumbling engines mixed with the rhythms of late-night parties. As they looked out their windows, they could see Andre's car idling in the driveway, the headlights cutting through the dark. The music stopped abruptly around 4 a.m., and all that was left was the sound of the wind and the occasional shuffle of someone moving inside. No one could see what went on behind closed doors, but they could feel the tension from across the street. The next morning, Andre appeared at breakfast, unusually quiet, but somehow more attentive than usual. He placed a plate of eggs and bacon in front of Eleanor, a soft smile on his face. "You look beautiful today, Ms. E," he said, the words slow and careful. He hadn't used that nickname in weeks. Eleanor looked at him, confused by the sudden shift. It was as though the man who had been aloof, distant, and unpredictable was now trying to make amends for something she couldn't yet understand. The compliment felt hollow, the gesture perfunctory. Something didn't sit right. She asked, "Andre, what's going on? You've been acting strange lately." He only nodded, picking up his coffee cup as if trying to play the part of the loving husband. But the coldness in his eyes didn't match his words. It was as if he was rehearsing something, playing a part, while the real plan was already unfolding in the background. He wasn't forgiving her. He was biding his time. That afternoon, Eleanor noticed the financial papers on the kitchen counter, papers Andre had been keeping from her. She had been so busy with her own work and had trusted him to handle his part of their finances. But now there was something about the way he seemed to push those papers aside, as if he didn't want her to see them. She found a life insurance policy update from his agent. Andre had increased her coverage to $500,000, citing garage safety risks as the reason for the rise in premiums. She was caught off guard. Why would he need such a large policy on her life? She had already signed an insurance renewal last year, and this felt unnecessary, almost too calculated. That night, he barely spoke to her. He went to bed early, his phone constantly buzzing beside him. The next morning, Eleanor had a strange feeling that something was off, something that she couldn't put into words. Andre's behavior was erratic, like a man torn between desperation and control, but he didn't show the usual signs of regret or anger. Instead, he seemed too calm, like he was preparing for something much larger, something that didn't include her. Eleanor had no idea that Andre had spent the past few days meticulously planning the next stage of his life, the one that didn't involve her, as she would later find out. Across town, Andre's mentee, Shanice Reed, 29, was receiving messages from him that would raise alarms if anyone else knew what was being said. "Couple more weeks and we'll be free," he wrote to Shanice in a text message, one of many that came in the days after he found out about the will changes. He hadn't said a word to Eleanor about the affair, but he had no intention of staying in a marriage that he now saw as a liability, something standing in the way of his freedom. In those texts, Shanice was the one who kept him calm, kept him focused. She would be his future, and he was just waiting for the right time to break free. Eleanor, however, remained unaware of the storm forming around her. In her mind, things were improving. She had made the changes to the will, and Andre was acting nicer, trying to make up for the tension they'd been experiencing. Little did she know, Andre's real plan was already set in motion. He had placed himself in the driver's seat, not only of their finances, but of her life. Every piece of her trust was now something he would use for his own advantage. April 12th, 2021. The sky had darkened early that evening, heavy clouds moving across Savannah like a slow tide, the storm looming over the horizon. Eleanor Matthews, as she did every Tuesday evening, was finishing choir, practice at her church. The notes of Amazing Grace still lingered in her mind as she packed away her sheet music, her fingers brushing against the edges of the hymnals. The usual hum of activity around her, the laughter of fellow choir members, the rustling of coats, felt distant as she stepped out into the night. The rain was just starting to fall in thin sheets, the kind that always seemed to promise more. As she made her way toward her car, Andre pulled up beside her in his sedan. The headlights cut through the rain like twin searchlights, illuminating her path. "I'll drive you home tonight," he said, his voice smooth as it always was, but with an edge that made Eleanor hesitate. She glanced at him for a moment. There was nothing outwardly alarming about him. They'd shared countless drives together after all. But tonight, something felt different. Still, she nodded, tired from the evening and not wanting to argue. "Thank you, Andre," she said quietly, sliding into the passenger seat. The drive began as it always did, casual conversation about the day's events. But as they passed through the city's familiar streets, Eleanor noticed the route was veering off from the one they usually took. "Andre, where are we going?" she asked, her voice laced with curiosity. He didn't respond immediately. The car slowed, making a loop, then another. Her concern grew, but she kept it to herself, chalking it up to his usual tendency to wander when lost in thought. At 9:02 p.m., as they reached Cypress Creek Bridge, Andre's voice broke the silence. "The car's acting up," he said with a grimace. "I think I need to pull over." Eleanor glanced at the dash. Nothing looked out of place. "Are you sure?" she asked, unsure why the moment felt so strange. He nodded and eased the car onto the shoulder of the road. As she stepped out into the rain, the umbrella barely protecting her from the wind, Eleanor didn't sense the impending danger. She was more concerned about the inconvenience of the broken car. She stood by the side of the vehicle, waiting for Andre to check under the hood. The rain intensified, the sky breaking open in sheets of water, thunder rolling in the distance. And then, out of nowhere, the headlights flared, blinding her, followed by the terrifying sound of the engine revving. The next moments happened in a blur. Eleanor stepped back, trying to shield herself from the downpour, but before she could react, Andre slammed the car into gear. The sound of tires screeching echoed, followed by a sickening thud. The impact sent her body crashing to the ground. Andre quickly reversed, and the tires skidded over her again, the sickening crunch of metal and bone swallowed by the thunderous rain. The world went still. Silence, except for the rain pounding relentlessly on the pavement. Andre jumped out of the car, his heart racing, the adrenaline pumping through his veins. He grabbed his phone, dialing 911 with trembling hands. My wife, she slipped. I tried to stop. I tried." His voice cracked with what seemed like panic, but it lacked the desperation of someone truly lost in the moment. His words came out in stilted fragments, each one tinged with the sound of rehearsed fear. The 911 operator responded, calm and collected, asking him to stay on the line. As Andre's voice quivered in response, the camera in his phone recorded the movement of the car, the GPS data pinging from his phone's dashcam. The black box data, accessed later, would tell a different story. A story that didn't fit the one Andre told. It showed no braking. It showed acceleration. And when the investigators later checked the black box on Andre's car, they found something shocking. The vehicle's speed increased just before the impact. The engine didn't slow as it should have in a moment of panic. The data told a cold, calculated truth. Andre had deliberately hit her, not once, but twice. When the police arrived at the scene, they found Eleanor lying in the rain-soaked road, her life slipping away with each passing second. The scene painted a clear picture of something far more intentional than an accident. Yet Andre's story didn't change. He continued to repeat that she had fallen, that it had been a terrible mistake. But the evidence would say otherwise. This wasn't a tragic mistake. It was a deliberate act. Thank you for your incredible support. This channel thrives because of viewers like you. Join our YouTube membership today to unlock exclusive perks, enjoy premium content, and help us keep creating the stories you love. Your support is what helps us bring these important stories to light. So don't forget to like, share, and stay connected for more. Detective Raymond Clark arrived at the scene just after the rain had stopped, the dark storm clouds hanging low, giving the night a heavy, oppressive feel. The sound of rainwater dripping off tree branches was the only thing that filled the silence as Clark stepped out of his unmarked car, his boots sinking slightly into the wet ground. The scene was eerily still, too still, for something that was supposed to be an accident. Eleanor Matthews lay in the road, her body just a few feet from the car that had struck her. Andre Collins, still in his clothes from earlier that evening, stood off to the side, his hands wringing nervously as the officers processed the scene. He seemed to be shaken, but something didn't sit right with Clark. The story he was telling, how his wife had slipped and fallen, didn't add up. Clark had seen too many accidents in his time, and this one had the unmistakable mark of something deliberate. As Clark walked around the car, he noticed the first of many inconsistencies. The tire tracks, clear even in the wet conditions, revealed a troubling detail. They weren't scattered haphazardly as you'd expect from an accident, but rather perfectly aligned, precise. It was as if someone had deliberately positioned the vehicle, the tires making the exact movements needed for the car to strike with full force. The black box from Andre's car would later confirm what the tire impressions already hinted at. Acceleration, not braking. The event recorder log showed that the pedal force was at 97%, confirming that Andre had driven the car with full force. He hadn't attempted to stop or slow down. In fact, the data told a story that Andre could never explain away. Clark bent down, examining the blood spatter on the undercarriage of the car. It was clear. There had been a second impact. The blood patterns underneath the vehicle confirmed what the tire tracks and event data had already suggested. A double strike, not just one. Andre's version of events, how she had fallen after stepping out, didn't fit the evidence. His claim that he had tried to stop her from slipping didn't hold up against the reality of what had transpired. The blood was in places it shouldn't have been if it had been an accidental fall, and the body, its positioning, told the tale of someone who had been struck deliberately, then run over again. The most unsettling part of the scene, however, wasn't the blood or the tire tracks. It was Andre himself. Clark had observed him the whole time, and there was something about his demeanor that felt wrong. Andre was too calm, too composed, as if he had already gone over this moment in his mind 1,000 times. When Clark crouched down near the car, his eyes caught something else. Andre's shoes were spotless. They showed no sign of mud or rain, nothing to suggest that he had been kneeling by his wife's body or trying to help her. That told Clark everything he needed to know. Andre wasn't helping his wife. He was standing there, pretending to be the grieving husband while the evidence piled up around him. Inside the car, Clark found another piece of damning evidence. Among the paperwork in the glove compartment was a set of insurance forms, dated just 3 weeks prior, all signed by Andre. The policy had been updated to increase Eleanor's accidental death benefit, yet another indication of Andre's calculated move to secure his future. The paperwork was filled out and signed by Andre, without Eleanor's knowledge or approval. The fact that this insurance policy was updated so close to Eleanor's death combined with the other evidence, painted a chilling picture. Andre had been planning his next move for weeks, and now the pieces were falling into place. Clark stood for a moment, looking down at Andre, who was still holding his phone, waiting for the authorities to finish their investigation. It was clear that he didn't fully understand the magnitude of what he had done, or maybe he just didn't care. As Clark's team continued to piece together the evidence, the truth was becoming undeniable. Andre had set this up, and the forensics weren't lying. Physics told the truth that his mouth could not. The body, the tire tracks, the blood spatter, all of it pointed to one conclusion. This was no accident. Eleanor Matthews had been deliberately targeted by the man she trusted most, and Andre Collins. He thought he had orchestrated the perfect crime, but in reality, he had only left a trail so clear that even the most casual observer could see through his lies. And now, as the investigation turned in on him, the question wasn't if he would be caught, but how long he could keep up the act before the walls closed in on him. Would he remain the grieving husband, or would the truth come crashing down, as it always does in cases like this? How long can someone lie to those closest to them? How well can we really know the people we trust most? When you're looking at someone you've spent years with, how do you even begin to see the person who's been hiding in plain sight all along? Detective Raymond Clark sat across from Shanice Reed, his eyes fixed on her as she shifted nervously in her seat. She was young, 29, dressed in casual clothes, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her sweater. The interview room was cold, sterile, the only sound the faint hum of the fluorescent lights above. Clark had already been briefed on her involvement with Andre Collins, but now it was time to hear it from her directly. The room felt heavy, like the truth was sitting right on the edge, just waiting to spill out. "Shanice, we know about the affair," Clark began, his voice steady but firm. "We just need to know what else you're hiding. What did Andre tell you about Eleanor?" Shanice looked down at her lap, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She hadn't expected this. She had been expecting sympathy, or perhaps a more gentle approach. But the cold, hard truth was in front of her. She let out a deep breath, then spoke in a voice that trembled slightly. He told me that Eleanor was standing in the way of everything we'd planned, that he needed to start fresh. He said the insurance money would be our ticket out, that we'd be free from her, from all the debt, from everything." Her words landed heavily in the room. The reality of Andre's cold manipulation now laid bare. She had been the other woman, a willing participant in a relationship built on lies. But now, with everything exposed, she could no longer pretend to be blind to the truth. He said he'd never been so sure of anything before. The money, the freedom, that was all he cared about, Shanice continued, her voice quieter now, almost as if she were trying to convince herself. Detectives pored over the phone records that had been seized from Andre's car, uncovering damning evidence of his calculated plan. Text messages between Andre and Shanice were exchanged in hushed tones, discussing the freedom money that would come once Eleanor was out of the picture. There were calls between the two, often in the middle of the night, where Andre would outline his plans in precise detail. Shanice was no longer just the other woman. She was a key player in a scheme that had cost an innocent life. But Shanice wasn't the only one who would expose Andre's double life. As the investigation progressed, the media began to catch wind of the story, and what was once a small-town tragedy turned into something much bigger. National outlets picked up the story, headlines reading, "Educator Killed in Staged Car Crash," the kind of headline that no one wanted, but that Andre had orchestrated perfectly. Eleanor Matthews' death was no longer just a local news story. It was a cautionary tale, a tragic reminder that even the people closest to us can be the most dangerous. As the media buzz grew, so did the heartbreak for those left behind. Maya Matthews, Eleanor's only daughter, had remained silent for weeks, struggling with the grief of losing her mother and the horror of knowing how it happened. But now, in the face of public outrage, she broke her silence. Maya appeared on local television, her face tear-streaked but resolute. She spoke directly to the camera, her words carrying the weight of a daughter's love, and the anger of someone who had been betrayed by the one person who should have protected her mother. "My mother built her life on trust," Maya said, her voice breaking, but her eyes never wavering from the camera. "She gave Andre everything she had, her love, her trust, her future, and he used it as currency. He took everything from her, and I'm not going to let him get away with it." Her words resonated across the country, sparking outrage and sympathy in equal measure. For the first time, the public saw the real cost of Andre's betrayal, not just in terms of money, but in human lives. As Maya's plea for justice echoed through the airwaves, the questions began to pile up. How had Andre pulled off such a carefully calculated crime? What drove him to betray the woman who had given him everything? Was he truly capable of taking a life for the sake of money, or was there something deeper that had pushed him over the edge? The case had turned into something bigger than anyone had imagined, and the investigation was just beginning to scratch the surface. The facts were clear. Andre Collins had manipulated, lied, and ultimately betrayed the woman who loved him. But as the case progressed, the question remained. Would he face the consequences of his actions, or would his charm and manipulation continue to protect him from the truth? How well can we truly know the people we trust the most? When someone you love turns out to be capable of such betrayal, how do you even begin to process the truth? What does it take for someone to betray not only the person they love, but everyone who has trusted them? October 2022. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with tension. The gallery was filled with people, friends, family, reporters, waiting to hear the final word on a case that had captivated the community. At the front, Andre Collins sat quietly, his hands clasped in front of him, his gaze focused downward. The bright lights overhead cast harsh shadows on his face, but he didn't flinch. His once confident demeanor had long since evaporated. Today, he was no longer the smooth-talking man who had won Eleanor's heart. He was a defendant, facing charges of first-degree murder and insurance fraud, and his fate was about to be sealed. The courtroom was hushed as the prosecutors laid out their case. The evidence was overwhelming. Charts from the data recorder were displayed, showing the spike in speed just before impact, proof that Andre had deliberately accelerated, not braked. Phone logs were read aloud, revealing the frequency of Andre's communications with Shanice Reed, his mentee, who had been a central figure in his plot. And then came the final blow, the insurance motive. The increase in Eleanor's policy days before her death, the beneficiary change, the fraudulent claim Andre had made with no intention of ever sharing the payout with her. The defense, however, was ready with their counterclaim. They argued that Eleanor's death had been an accident, caused by hydroplaning on the slick roads that night. They painted a picture of a man in distress, a husband doing everything he could to save his wife from a tragic incident. The jury listened, but the narrative didn't hold. The data, the phone records, the financial motive, none of it supported the defense's version of events. Then, in a moment that shifted the entire trial, Harold Nixon, Eleanor's attorney, stood up to present the final piece of the puzzle. With steady hands, he pulled out Eleanor's will, signed just the day before her death. The room went silent as the pages were read aloud. The terms were clear. Eleanor had removed Andre as her beneficiary, leaving everything to her daughter, Maya. It was a devastating blow to Andre, who had hoped to inherit her wealth through her untimely death. His face went blank, his shoulders stiffening as the full weight of the reality hit him. He would inherit nothing, nothing from the woman he had tried to manipulate, nothing from the life he had worked so hard to destroy. His blank stare in that moment was the face of a man who had gambled everything and lost. When the verdict came down, the courtroom was still. The judge's voice broke the silence, his words clear and final. Guilty of first-degree murder and insurance fraud. Andre's future, which he had so carefully planned, was now nothing more than an endless prison sentence. Life without parole. He had thought killing Eleanor would secure his future. Instead, it buried his own. How far can someone go in the name of greed? How well can we truly know the people closest to us? What would you do if the person you trusted most was hiding something this dark, this deadly? The rain fell gently, washing over Savannah like a cleansing, or tide. The funeral was intimate, quiet, and poignant. Family, friends, and those who knew Eleanor Matthews from her years of service gathered in the church she had loved so much. Soft piano music played in the background, filling the space with a quiet sadness. The air was thick with grief, but beneath it there was something more, something resilient, something that refused to let her memory fade into the shadows of what had happened. Maya Matthews stood at the front, holding her mother's journal, her hands trembling slightly. As she began to read aloud, the words of Eleanor, written in quiet reflection, echoed through the room. If kindness blinds you to danger, remember, God gave you instincts for a reason. The words hit hard, not just for the family gathered, but for everyone who had known Eleanor, the woman who had spent her life trusting others, giving everything for the people she loved, only to be betrayed by the one person she had trusted most. Maya's voice cracked as she finished reading, but she held herself steady. She was no longer the daughter mourning her mother's death. She was now the woman carrying her mother's legacy. Eleanor's kindness had been her strength, but now, that very kindness would be transformed into something that could protect other women from the same fate. Maya, in her mother's memory, announced the creation of a scholarship for women escaping financial abuse. It was a tribute to Eleanor's life, a way to ensure that her mother's legacy wasn't just one of tragic loss, but one that would give strength and hope to others who needed it most. As the crowd filed out of the church, a sense of finality settled over the room. The storm had passed, but the scars left by Eleanor's death would not fade easily. For those who had been closest to her, the weight of her loss would be felt for years to come. But the story of Eleanor Matthews, of love twisted into control, was far from over. Maya's words, standing strong in the face of everything her mother had endured, would ensure that her story lived on, not as a cautionary tale, but as a call to action. And as the rain continued to fall, the camera zoomed out, capturing the tire marks left in the wet earth, now slowly being washed away, erasing the traces of the tragedy that had unfolded. But some marks, no matter how much time passes, will never truly fade. They leave their imprint, not just on the ground, but in the hearts of those who loved, who fought, and who continue to fight for justice. Eleanor Matthews' story isn't just about greed. It's about how love, when twisted by control, becomes the weapon it was meant to protect you from. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please take a moment to hit the like button, share it with those you care about, and subscribe for more stories like this. Protect the people you love before someone decides their worth is measured in money.